Upon hearing the name Wild Hall from Little Mink's mouth, Lin Dong paused, a bit puzzled. Didn't you say the Wild Hall was the weakest? In the beginning, the 4 halls of Dao Sect were equally matched. Only later did some differences emerge. But back then, the strongest hall wasn't the Heaven Hall. It was the Wild Hall. Little Mink replied calmly. Oh. Lin Dong was surprised. He hadn't expected that the last-ranked Wild Hall once held such prominence. Why are they ranked so low now? Lin Dong asked. The 4 halls of Dao Sect each possess a unique scripture. The Heavenly Sovereign Scripture of Heaven Hall, the Earthly Sovereign Scripture of Earth Hall, the Grand Scripture of the Grand Hall, and the Great Wilderness Scripture of Wild Hall. These 4 scriptures are Dao Sect's pinnacle martial arts. Their creators were beings of immense power, even feared during ancient times. Among them, the most enigmatic is the Great Wilderness Scripture of Wild Hall. Little Mink's gaze turned serious, an expression Lin Dong rarely saw from him, which allowed Lin Dong to sense the formidable nature of this scripture. However, while the Great Wilderness Scripture is incredibly powerful, it comes with a flaw. It demands too much from its cultivator. To this day, even though countless geniuses have emerged from Wild Hall, very few have managed to comprehend it. And with no one able to master the Great Wilderness Scripture, the top disciples of Wild Hall naturally couldn't compete with the disciples from the other halls, who had mastered the other 3 scriptures. As a result, they have consistently ranked last over the years. Lin Dong nodded in understanding. These 4 scriptures were the trump cards of the 4 halls. But Wild Hall had the unfortunate luck of possessing one that was nearly impossible to cultivate. In a way, this made the Great Wilderness Scripture somewhat useless. No matter how powerful it was, if no one could train in it, it was of no value. Of course, Wild Hall is also biding its time. If one day a disciple manages to comprehend the Great Wilderness Scripture, they could rise to the top and reclaim the title of the strongest hall. Little Mink chuckled. That's strong? Lin Dong smacked his lips, amazed by how terrifying the Great Wilderness Scripture was. If no one could grasp it, it remained dormant. But once mastered, it could shake the world. It's not an exaggeration. Every disciple who has ever mastered the Great Wilderness Scripture has become exceptionally outstanding. To give you a recent example, do you know who the last person to master it was? Little Mink asked with a grin. Who? Lin Dong reflexively asked, but then something clicked in his mind, and his expression changed. Could it be the one who stormed Yuan Sect and cut down 3 of their elders? Exactly. Now you understand why there's so much tension between Wu Dao and Lu Tong? Wild Hall finally produced a genius who mastered the Great Wilderness Scripture, only for Yuan Sect to kill him. That grudge can't be resolved with just a few words. Little Mink nodded. No wonder. Lin Dong nodded silently and inwardly praised the Great Wilderness Scripture. It truly lived up to its reputation as the most mysterious of the 4 great scriptures. He couldn't help but wonder how it compared to the Azure Dragon transformation art that Qingji had given him. Are you asking me to join Wild Hall because you want me to learn the Great Wilderness Scripture? Lin Dong finally understood Little Mink's intentions. Exactly. Now that you're in Dao Sect, you must get your hands on that scripture. Little Mink nodded. Besides, the other 3 halls are filled with geniuses and monsters. Even if you went there, you might not stand out right away. But if you join Wild Hall, Wu Dao will surely take great care of you. It's better to be the head of a chicken than the tail of a snake. Once you master the Great Wilderness Scripture, you'll be among the top young disciples in Dao Sect. That's the only way you'll quickly catch up to Ling Qingzhu. Lin Dong rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Though he had won the 100 Dynasty War, this was not a kingdom but one of the greatest super sects in the Eastern Mystery region. Every disciple here had been selected through rigorous testing, and the 100 Dynasty War wasn't even the only way super sects recruited disciples. So, being the champion of that war didn't mean much within Dao Sect. Alright, I'll join Wild Hall. Lin Dong glanced at Wu Dao's back ahead and made up his mind. Little Mink's words had successfully piqued his interest in the Great Wilderness Scripture. As Lin Dong and Little Mink continued their conversation, the light array carrying them slowly descended toward a towering mountain. On top of the peak stood several grand halls, and at the very summit, surrounded by mist, a vast platform of green stone appeared. Upon the platform, huge pillars stood tall, exuding an imposing grandeur. Lin Dong and his companions slowly descended with the light array. "Haha, Wu Dao, you're finally back." As they landed, a voice echoed from ahead. Lin Dong looked up and saw a dozen figures standing on the green platform. At the forefront were 3 middle-aged men, standing with their hands behind their backs, exuding an extraordinary aura. From their bodies, Lin Dong sensed an overwhelming presence. If he wasn't mistaken, these 3 were likely the vice hall masters of the other 3 halls. Lin Dong briefly scanned the 3 before shifting his gaze to the disciples beside them. Each hall had 1 disciple standing there, 2 men and 1 woman, all with powerful auras, even surpassing the patrol disciples they had encountered earlier. Among the 3, the one who caught Lin Dong's attention most was the young girl. She was around the same age as Su Ro, but taller and dressed in a striking red dress, standing elegantly. Her appearance was exceptional, but what drew Lin Dong's gaze was not her beauty, but the strange energy emanating from her body. Within that energy, he faintly heard a sound resembling the clear ringing of a musical instrument. This was something Lin Dong had never seen before, and it piqued his curiosity. "Couldn't wait for us, could you?" Wu Dao landed and glanced at the 3 middle-aged men, his tone indifferent. "Haha, the news of the 100 Dynasty War has spread throughout the sect. Who would have thought that this year's champion wouldn't be claimed by the Tianyuan dynasty but would choose to join Dao Sect instead? It's quite satisfying." The man in red laughed. His laughter had a thunderous quality, shaking the surrounding air. He was Wei Sin, the Vice Hall Master of Heaven Hall. "Who's this year's 100 Dynasty War champion?" asked the Vice Hall Master of Earth Hall with a smile, his eyes scanning Lin Dong and the others with keen interest. Wu Dao snorted and nodded toward Lin Dong. Lin Dong stepped forward and respectfully cupped his fists toward the 3 men. Disciple Lin Dong greets the 3 Vice Hall Masters. As Lin Dong stepped forward, the 3 Vice Hall Masters, along with the girl in red, turned their attention to him. They were clearly interested in this new disciple, whose name had already spread within Dao Sect. 4th Nirvana Stage. Achieving victory in the 100 Dynasty War with that level of primordial energy is indeed surprising. Wei Sin's eyes gleamed as he observed Lin Dong, instantly seeing through his cultivation level. 4th Nirvana Stage? The girl in red was taken aback. That level of strength wasn't particularly outstanding. How had he managed to win the 100 Dynasty War? Wait, there's also spiritual power. Quite the youngster. You've reached the level of a 4-seal Heavenly Talisman Master. No wonder. Wei Sin's sharp eyes saw through Lin Dong's hidden spiritual cultivation, surprising the latter. Lin Dong had always kept his spiritual power tightly controlled, yet Wei Sun had still uncovered it. No wonder he was the Vice Hall Master of Heaven Hall. 4-seal Heavenly Talisman Master? Upon hearing this, the red-clad girl and the 2 handsome young men beside her showed a hint of surprise. They hadn't expected Lin Dong to have refined both his primordial energy and spiritual power to such a level. A 4th Nirvana Stage expert with the skills of a 4-seal Heavenly Talisman Master could indeed rival those at the 5th Nirvana Stage. However, if I recall correctly, Qin Tian of the Tianyuan dynasty was at the 6th Nirvana Stage. To have defeated him, you must have had some extraordinary tricks up your sleeve. TSK. For someone from a low-level dynasty, reaching this point is truly impressive. Wei Sin chuckled, clearly well informed about Lin Dong. Seeing how Wei Sin kept staring at Lin Dong, Wu Dao's face darkened with displeasure, but there was nothing he could do. Heaven Hall was the strongest of the 4 halls and had the first pick of new recruits. If Lin Dong agreed, no one could stop it. The thought of losing such a rare talent to Heaven Hall frustrated Wu Dao. "Haha, Lin Dong is impressive. He'll join Heaven Hall," Wei Sin said with a laugh after observing Lin Dong for a while. The Vice Hall Masters of Earth Hall and Grand Hall exchanged glances, clearly disappointed that Heaven Hall had once again claimed a promising disciple. Wu Dao's face grew even darker, but he could only wave his sleeve in frustration. He turned to Lin Dong and said, "Heaven Hall is the strongest hall. If you wish, you can join them." Lin Dong looked at Wei Sin, who was smiling warmly, then glanced at the dejected Wu Dao. He sighed and cupped his fists. "Thank you for your offer, Vice Hall Master. However, I'd like to join Wild Hall." The young man's apologetic voice echoed across the platform, leaving everyone stunned. Join the Wild Hall? On the hall selection platform, every gaze locked onto Lin Dong in disbelief. Each face was filled with shock, except for Little Mink and Xiao Yin, who remained calm as ever. "Lin Dong, you?" Even Wu Dao was stunned by Lin Dong's words, clearly unable to comprehend why he would give up joining the most powerful Heaven Hall and instead choose the Wild Hall. Heaven Hall's Vice Hall Master, Wei Xin, gradually recovered from his shock, fixing a stern gaze on Lin Dong as his brow furrowed. In a low voice, he said, "Lin Dong, you have talent, but don't destroy your future. I mean no disrespect to Wild Hall, but I assure you, only in Heaven Hall will you reach your full potential." Though Wu Dao and the others pursed their lips at Wei Xin's words, they didn't refute him. The truth was, among the 4 halls, Heaven Hall was indeed the strongest. Lin Dong gave a wry smile and said, "I think the Wild Hall might suit me better. What do you think, Vice Hall Master Wu Dao?" As he finished, he cast a sidelong glance at Wu Dao, dragging out his words, hinting that perhaps the old man should say something to back him up. After all, it wasn't easy standing alone under the piercing stares of the Dao Sect elites. Wu Dao's face twitched at Lin Dong's words, and Lin Dong could detect a glimmer of surprise in his eyes. But after a brief hesitation, Wu Dao said something that nearly made Lin Dong cough up blood. "Heaven Hall is indeed stronger than Wild Hall? Is this old guy too honest for his own good?" Lin Dong was speechless. He hadn't expected the old man to practically push him toward Heaven Hall, a golden opportunity right in front of him. "But if you're determined to join Wild Hall, I will fully support you. No matter what, I won't let it ruin your future." Wu Dao finally gritted his teeth and said. Only then did Lin Dong breathe a sigh of relief. He looked apologetically at Wei Xin, who clearly wasn't pleased. The last thing Lin Dong wanted was to offend the Heaven Hall Vice Hall Master on his first day at Dao Sect. Wei Xin frowned, studying Lin Dong intently for a moment before shaking his head with a faint sigh. "Since this is your choice, I won't say more. Just be sure to think it through." Hearing that Wei Xin's tone lacked any deep resentment, Lin Dong exhaled softly. It seemed the Dao Sect higher-ups weren't as narrow-minded as he had feared. "You're being selfish." Just as Lin Dong was about to relax, a clear, melodious voice suddenly sounded. Startled, he looked up and saw the red-clad girl frowning slightly as she stared at him. "How am I selfish?" Although the girl before him was undeniably beautiful, Lin Dong was irritated by her accusation and responded with a frown. "You're talented. If you join Heaven Hall, it will maximize your potential, and your increased strength will benefit the sect. But now, you've turned away from that path, weakening the sect's strength by a fraction. Isn't that selfish?" Her voice was crisp, accompanied by the soft sound of musical instruments, a tone that was soothing to the ears yet carried a sharpness that left many around them stunned. Quite the sharp tongue. This thought crossed not only Lin Dong's mind, but also those of Liu Bai and the others behind him. They exchanged glances, secretly impressed by the girl's verbal prowess. What had been a simple hall selection had somehow been escalated to a matter of sect-wide importance. "I believe there's no such thing as the strongest hall, only the hall that suits me best," Lin Dong replied, rubbing his nose. "In theory, that might be true. But the fact remains, Heaven Hall is the strongest of the 4. The red-clad girl raised her eyebrows, her gaze aggressively fixating on Lin Dong. "I dare say, if you join Wild Hall, you might not even qualify for the next hall trial. By then, your title as the 100 Dynasty War Champion could turn into a joke." Lin Dong's brow furrowed. His gaze, just as unyielding, locked onto the girl as he responded. "Since you're so keen on theory, let me explain why. I don't like mediocrity. Sure, joining Heaven Hall might benefit me, but it won't help me reach my fullest potential because Heaven Hall doesn't have the Great Wilderness Scripture. If I can comprehend the Great Wilderness Scripture, do you think that strengthens Dao Sect's power or weakens it?" Lin Dong's words sent a fresh wave of surprise through the crowd. Only now did everyone realize that he was after the Great Wilderness Scripture. But still, wasn't he being a little too arrogant? The Great Wilderness Scripture was the most enigmatic of the 4 great scriptures, and in all of Wild Hall's history, the number of disciples who had comprehended it could be counted on 2 hands. Yet Lin Dong dared to claim he would master it? Even the red-clad girl was taken aback by Lin Dong's audacity. But soon, a faint smirk appeared on her lips as she pointed her slender, jade-like finger at him, her red lips parting slightly, arrogant and full of yourself. As her jade hand extended, Lin Dong noticed how extraordinarily beautiful it was, long and flawless, like the finest white jade. Her fingers were perfectly proportioned, like something crafted to golden ratios, devoid of any blemish. The faint glow reflecting off her skin was almost mesmerizing. It was the first time Lin Dong had seen such perfect hands, and his eyes flashed with a trace of admiration. The red-clad girl might not be the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, but her hands were unmatched. Now's not the time to argue over this. As for whether I can comprehend the Great Wilderness Scripture, we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? Lin Dong smiled as he met the red-clad girl's gaze. The Great Wilderness Scripture's power is undeniable. Those who have mastered it are legendary figures in Dao Sect's history. But do you know how many have succeeded since Dao Sect's founding? The red-clad girl sneered. You can say I'm overestimating myself, but you're being too ambitious. Since you've challenged me to see how this unfolds, fine. I, Ying Huanhuan, will be watching. If you can master the Great Wilderness Scripture, I'll do whatever you want. But if you fail, I'm sure plenty of Heaven Hall disciples will be eager to challenge their new junior brother. You're more than welcome. Lin Dong smiled lightly, unperturbed by the subtle threats in her words. Even if he couldn't master the Great Wilderness Scripture, he wasn't the type to be pushed around easily. Humph. Seeing that the conversation had reached this point, Ying Huanhuan could only let out a huff, her large eyes filled with annoyance. It seemed the ever-eloquent girl had, for once, been bested in an argument, and the frustration was evident on her face. Since you're set on chasing after the Great Wilderness Scripture, I won't say anything further. If you succeed, the whole sect will rejoice. But sometimes it's wise to know your limits, Wei Sen said calmly. With Lin Dong mentioning the Great Wilderness Scripture, even he had no room to object. After all, he couldn't deny that it was the most powerful of the 4 great scriptures. If it weren't so difficult to master, Wild Hall would have dominated the other halls long ago. Anyone else interested in joining Wild Hall? Wei Sen's gaze swept over the other disciples selected from the 100 Dynasty War. Little Mink and Xiao Yin didn't waste a word, immediately stepping up beside Lin Dong. Lu Bai and Mo Ling and their group hesitated briefly but then followed as well. They figured that since they'd come to Dao Sect with Lin Dong, they might as well stick with him to the end. Besides, even if they managed to join Heaven Hall, it would likely be a stretch for them to fit in. Joining Wild Hall with Lin Dong felt like a safer bet. Though they followed Lin Dong, most of the other disciples chose not to. Since they had no personal ties with Lin Dong, they weren't about to follow him into the weakest hall. Lin Dong remained calm at this sight. He had no interest in forming cliques or alliances. As for Lu Bai and Mo Ling, they followed him out of friendship, but it was only natural that others wouldn't make the same choice. Seeing this, Wei Sun flicked his sleeve, sending a stream of light that selected the most talented disciples from the remaining group. The Vice Hall Masters of Earth Hall and Grand Hall then took their turns, picking the rest of the disciples with decent talent, leaving only a handful who were comparatively weaker. Now that the disciple selection is complete, we shall take our leave. With a brief nod to Wu Dao, Wei Sun cast one last deep look at Lin Dong before waving his sleeve. The gathered Yuan power swirled into a fierce gust of wind, sweeping up the selected disciples and whisking them away. Lin Dong, remember your words. I look forward to you surprising us. But before that, make sure you earn the right to study the Great Wilderness Scripture. Ying Huanhuan, a playful smirk on her face, gave Lin Dong a mocking wave before her slender figure vanished as she followed the others. As they were leaving, the Vice Hall Masters of the Earth Hall and Grand Hall also led their people away, leaving the platform much emptier. Sigh. Lin Dong stretched lazily and let out a sigh, feeling a bit helpless. It seemed like he had already offended this mysterious girl right after arriving. "Hey, little guy. I didn't expect you to have such guts." Wu Dao turned his head, smiling with narrowed eyes as he stared at Lin Dong, his gaze filled with amusement. "Vice Hall Master Wu Dao, we'll be under your care from now on. Please look after us," Lin Dong replied with a smile. In front of Wu Dao, he seemed far more at ease than he had been with Wei San and the others. "Cut the flattery. Although what you did was quite satisfying, everything has to be done by the rules," Wu Dao chuckled, scolding lightly. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "But kid, rejecting the Heaven Hall today will probably make you the target of their disciples' attention from now on." Seeing Wu Dao's grinning face, Lin Dong felt a little speechless. Was this old man gloating at his misfortune? "Oh, by the way, Ying Huanhuan has an older sister named Ying Xiao. She's the senior sister of the Heaven Hall and the most powerful figure among the Dao Sect's younger generation. Since you argued with Ying Huanhuan today, it's likely that her sister will keep an eye on you. Good luck." "I've got faith in you," Wu Dao said, stroking his chin as if casually dropping the information. Damn it. Hearing this, even someone like Lin Dong couldn't help but curse under his breath. Great. All he did was choose a hall to cultivate in, and now he had a whole heap of trouble on his hands. It seemed that the days ahead wouldn't be so peaceful. The Wild Hall, located in the southwest corner of the Dao Sect, was surrounded by dozens of towering peaks. Massive waterfalls, like Milky Ways, cascaded down from these peaks, the thunderous roar echoing across the skies. Upon those peaks, countless large halls stood tall, with dense crowds of figures moving about like ants, exuding an overwhelming sense of vitality. Encircling these peaks was a colossal river, stretching thousands of meters across the sky like a celestial river. Only upon closer inspection could one discover that this river was actually condensed from Nirvana Chi, a true pill river. The grandeur of these super sects was not much inferior to that of the ancient sects. This was Lin Dong's first thought when he saw the Pill River. His heart surged with excitement. He had experienced the benefits of the Pill River before during his time in the ancient battlefield. However, due to time constraints, he couldn't stay long to enjoy its effects. So now, seeing that the Wild Hall also possessed such a river, he couldn't help but feel thrilled. The Wild Hall has 3,000 disciples and 300 personal disciples, all of whom are elites chosen through a strict selection process. Moreover, on the outskirts, there are over 10,000 outer disciples. As long as they pass the test, they can become official members of the Wild Hall at any time, Wu Dao said, pointing to the towering peaks with a trace of pride in his voice. 300 personal disciples, 3,000 regular disciples, and over 10,000 outer disciples. Lin Dong was amazed. He knew that to become a personal disciple of one of these super sects, according to the rules of the 100 Dynasty War, one had to make it onto the Nirvana Golden ranking. Yet here in the Wild Hall alone, there were 300 personal disciples. These 300 were clearly elites, similar to the top-tier geniuses of the great dynasties, like Lan Ying. This number alone surpassed the total number of Nirvana Golden ranking cultivators from their entire batch of the 100 Dynasty War. It seemed the super sects had plenty of ways to recruit disciples. Lin Dong didn't ask about the other 3 halls, but he could easily guess that their numbers were likely even greater than the Wild Halls. Seeing it all laid out like this, the true power of the Dao Sect became clear. Compared to these behemoths, it was no wonder that the dynasties of the Eastern Mystery region couldn't hope to match them. With such a terrifying foundation of disciples, it was no wonder they were so strong. Lin Dong, with your performance, you naturally qualify to become a personal disciple. But let me be clear, competition in the Wild Hall is fierce. If you want better cultivation resources, you'll need to prove yourself worthy. Otherwise, someone will quickly replace you, Wu Dao said sternly, fixing Lin Dong with a serious look. This competition serves to hone our disciples, so we don't intervene in their sparring or challenges. If you want to enjoy excellent cultivation treatment in the Wild Hall, the only thing that matters is your strength, enough strength to protect your privileges. You're the champion of this year's 100 Dynasty War, and you've earned quite a few cultivation resources for our Dao Sect. Naturally, there's a reward for you. But whether or not you can hold on to it is another matter. What kind of reward? Lin Dong asked, his curiosity piqued. Pill River Baptism. Wu Dao smiled faintly and pointed to the colossal Pill River. Deep within the Pill River, pure Nirvana Chi is born every year. We call it Nirvana Gold Chi, and it has an immensely nourishing effect on those in the Nirvana stage. When the time comes, the Hall Master and I will personally help channel the Nirvana Gold Chi to temper both your body and your primordial energy. If you can withstand it, your strength will definitely improve. That sounds pretty good. Lin Dong's eyes lit up. Anything that warranted the personal attention of the Wild Hall's 2 Hall Masters had to be something extraordinary. Of course it's good. Usually, only the most outstanding disciples of the Wild Hall get this treatment. If you hadn't made such a great contribution, you wouldn't be eligible, Wu Dao said, rolling his eyes. By the way, who is the strongest disciple in the Wild Hall right now? Lin Dong asked with a smile. There are 4 personal disciples, all at the 7th Nirvana stage. None of them are easy to deal with, Wu Dao replied with a teasing grin. 7th Nirvana stage, huh? Lin Dong's eyes narrowed slightly before he slowly nodded and whispered, they're strong, but surpassing them shouldn't be too difficult. With Lin Dong's current strength, he could rival someone at the 6th Nirvana stage. If his strength improved further, he would be able to hold his own against even the strongest at the 7th Nirvana stage. He had just entered the Wild Hall, and there would be plenty of time to catch up to his senior brothers. Watching Lin Dong's confident, youthful smile, Wu Dao nodded inwardly. He had personally witnessed Lin Dong's rise from the ancient battlefield. For a young man from a low-ranked dynasty to stand out, there was nothing short of a miracle. If you want to qualify to study the great wilderness scripture, you will indeed need to defeat them, but there's still some time before that. As for the Pill River Baptism, only a select few in the Wild Hall ever receive such treatment. So for a newcomer like you to get it, there will undoubtedly be some disgruntled disciples. How you handle that dissatisfaction will be up to you. We won't get involved, Wu Dao said calmly. I understand, Lin Dong replied with a light smile. By the way, what are your plans for these 2 friends of yours? Wu Dao suddenly glanced at Little Mink and Little Flame, who stood beside Lin Dong. He knew their identities and understood that Little Mink probably wouldn't choose to join the Dao Sect. I'll take Little Flame and leave in 2 days, Little Mink lazily replied. Leave? Lin Dong was shocked. Don't worry, I'm taking him to a place in the Eastern Mystery region where the resources will help him grow stronger, Little Mink said with a smile. Big brother, second brother says I'll be able to improve quickly there. I'll go with him for a while, but if you run into trouble, just send a message to second brother, and we'll come rushing back, Little Flame said with a grin, scratching his head. Relax, nothing will happen with me around, Little Mink said with a reassuring smile to Lin Dong. Seeing this, Lin Dong hesitated for a moment, but ultimately said nothing more. Little Mink had stuck by his side out of concern, but now that he had joined the Dao Sect, as long as nothing major happened, it should be safe enough. Given that, Little Mink could finally have some freedom. Lin Dong also knew that Little Mink had plenty of secrets. Since Little Mink hadn't shared them, he didn't push. At his current strength, he wasn't powerful enough to help with many of Little Mink's affairs anyway. Alright, we've arrived at the Wild Hall. Today, you all can rest, and tomorrow, you'll head to the Pill River platform. Then, we'll begin your Pill River Baptism, Wu Dao said as he led them to a massive mountain, flicking his sleeve. Several disciples swiftly approached as he turned his gaze toward Lin Dong and the others. Understood. At his words, the group respectfully responded. Wu Dao nodded slightly then smiled. Also, welcome to the Wild Hall. From now on, this will be your home. Hearing this, Lu Bai and the others couldn't help but show their excitement. After so many hardships, they had finally succeeded in becoming disciples of a super sect. While Lin Dong and the others were settling into the Wild Hall, far to the east of the Dao Sect, a series of towering mountains stretched into the sky, even more imposing than those at the Wild Hall. This was where the Heaven Hall was located. Suspended above the mountains of the Heaven Hall was a Pill River as well, larger than the one at the Wild Hall. Its end couldn't even be seen, and the overwhelming nirvana chi it emitted distorted the very air. Upon closer inspection, Floating platforms could be seen scattered around the Pill River. Many disciples sat cross-legged on these platforms, cultivating, with powerful auras continuously radiating from their bodies. These platforms were spread across the river, but the closer one got to the center, the fewer platforms there were, and the number of disciples on them dwindled. Whoosh! A swift sound broke through the air above the Pill River, accompanied by the faint, harmonious notes of musical instruments, as if from the heavens. Many cultivating disciples opened their eyes, gazing at the figure flying across the sky with a trace of fascination. The figure in the sky ignored the attention and headed straight into the depths of the Pill River, gently landing on the farthest platform. As she descended, her red dress fluttered slightly. It was none other than Ying Huanhuan, who had just exchanged sharp words with Lin Dong. The moment she landed, her eyes looked forward. There, at the edge of the platform, a woman sat quietly, surrounded by dense nirvana chi. The woman, dressed in a black robe, had a slender figure and long, soft black hair tied loosely with a green ribbon. The end of the ribbon formed a sharp arc, and her jade-like fingers rested on her knees, forming a hand seal. Between her hands lay a blue sword, faint threads of sword energy emanating from it, cutting through the surrounding nirvana chi. Sis. The moment Ying Huanhuan saw the black-robed woman before her, she couldn't help but pout. This woman was none other than the top figure among the Dao Sect's younger generation, the senior sister of the Heaven Hall, EngSubs. On the platform, the black-robed woman slowly opened her eyes upon hearing the clear voice behind her. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, softening her otherwise cold demeanor in an instant. Weren't you supposed to be with Uncle Wei, selecting the new disciples? Why do you look like this? EngSubs asked gracefully, gently gripping her blue sword as she stood, her eyes carrying a hint of amusement as she looked at Ying Huanhuan. Don't even bring it up, Ying Huanhuan grumbled, her brows furrowing. I wanted to see what the champion of the 100 Dynasty War was capable of, but it turns out he's just an arrogant fool. Oh. EngSubs' gaze shifted toward the Pill River, her voice calm and without much emotion. That guy actually refused to join the Heaven Hall and ran off to the Wild Hall, Ying Huanhuan said, clearly annoyed. Really? EngSubs raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. It was clearly the first time she had heard of such a thing. He said he wants to cultivate the great wilderness scripture. Ambitious, EngSubs remarked softly. Ambitious, sure, but doesn't he realize he's biting off more than he can chew? If the great wilderness scripture were that easy to cultivate, the Wild Hall would have surpassed the Heaven Hall long ago. Even you sat in front of the Wild Monument for a month without gaining anything. How could that fool possibly succeed? Ying Huanhuan snorted. The great wilderness scripture was beyond my reach. That doesn't mean it's impossible for others, EngSubs replied as she grasped her blue sword, pointing it lightly toward the Pill River, where threads of sharp sword energy spread out. Cultivating the great wilderness scripture requires more than just luck. Do you really think that guy stands a chance? Ying Huanhuan asked. EngSubs tilted her head slightly before replying softly, 2 chances out of 10. You think that guy has a 20% chance of succeeding? How's that possible? You haven't even met him. Ying Huanhuan's eyes widened in surprise. Anyone who can surpass the geniuses of super dynasties despite being from a low-level dynasty isn't simple. The title of champion in the 100 Dynasty War isn't something won by luck, EngSubs said quietly. Who knows? That guy didn't seem all that special. Ying Huanhuan muttered, still unconvinced. Then, her eyes twinkled mischievously. Oh, and that guy had the nerve to make a bet with me? Before she could finish, EngSubs' calm voice interrupted from ahead. Don't drag me into this. You'll have plenty of people willing to stand up for you. I don't need to be one of them. I have more important things to focus on. It's not just because you lost once to Ling Qingzhu from the Nine Heavens Taiching Palace. Ying Huanhuan muttered under her breath. But the moment the words left her lips, she felt the sword energy around the platform sharpen dramatically and quickly fell silent. Little brat, if you're feeling too free lately, I can arrange for you to spend a few days in isolation, EngSubs said, her tone calm but firm. Immediately, Ying Huanhuan covered her mouth and, without hesitation, turned and fled. Hearing the swift, rabbit-like retreat behind her, the black-robed woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Her blue sword shot forward, straight as an arrow, and in an instant, an overwhelming wave of sword energy burst forth. The surging Pill River ahead of her was cleaved apart, a massive 100-meter-long scar gouged deep into it. It wasn't until several moments later that the river slowly returned to its original state. Before her, the powerful Nirvana chi condensed, forming a hazy, illusory figure, one that resembled none other than Ling Qingzhu. The black-robed woman's eyes were as deep as a still pond. Her slender fingers extended and gently tapped the forehead of the phantom figure. Sword energy surged, instantly tearing the shadow into nothingness. Ling Qingzhu, I will defeat you. The next day, as the morning sunlight spilled over the Dao Sect, an unusual commotion stirred among the towering peaks of the Wild Hall, something that rarely happened. The source of this excitement was news that had spread quietly. Among the newly admitted disciples of the Wild Hall was none other than the champion of the 100 Dynasty War. Moreover, this disciple had boldly chosen to forego joining the Heaven Hall and instead joined the Wild Hall. But what really caught the attention of the Wild Hall disciples was that this newcomer had immediately been granted the privilege of a Pill River baptism on his first day. Normally, the Pill River baptism was a reward reserved for only the most exceptional disciples of the Wild Hall. Many had been working hard all year for the chance, but no one could have expected that the baptism would be snatched away by a newcomer. Unsurprisingly, many disciples were not pleased. While they acknowledged that winning the 100 Dynasty War brought great benefits to the Dao Sect, and such rewards weren't entirely unjustified, they couldn't help but feel disgruntled. After all, this new kid had barely set foot in the Wild Hall and was already jumping ahead, acting like the senior disciples didn't even exist. Near the northern side of the Wild Hall, close to the Pill River, stood a particularly massive mountain peak. On its broad platform, a large crowd had already gathered, and the atmosphere was buzzing with activity. At the front of the platform, a group of disciples stood clustered around a man in a gray robe, whose face was dark with anger as he glared at the Pill River. His fury was palpable to anyone who saw him. Senior brother Tong Chuan, don't be too upset. No one saw this coming. A few disciples beside him tried to console him, but their efforts didn't seem to ease his temper. The surrounding disciples looked on with sympathy. Tong Chuan was one of the personal disciples most likely to receive the Pill River baptism this year, and he had been determined to get it. However, out of nowhere, this newly admitted disciple had swooped in and taken the prize, so it was no wonder he was furious. Just a newly admitted disciple. Even if he is the champion of the 100 Dynasty War, he needs to understand the importance of seniority. If he thinks he can claim the Pill River baptism, he better be ready to put in a couple of years at the Wild Hall first, Tong Chuan said coldly. The disciples around him could only respond with wry smiles. It seemed clear that Tong Chuan wouldn't let this go easily. They felt a bit sorry for the new disciple. While he had certainly contributed to the Dao Sect, the Wild Hall had its own rules. Privileges like the Pill River baptism had to be earned through strength. If Tong Chuan decided to make a move, even if the new disciple ultimately managed to keep the baptism, his reputation would surely take a hit. As for who had the upper hand, they weren't worried. Tong Chuan had been with the Wild Hall for 3 years and had reached the 6th Nirvana stage. Even among the personal disciples, he was considered quite strong. The newcomer, on the other hand, was said to only be at the 4th Nirvana stage. Clearly, word had spread, as more and more disciples gathered at the Pill River platform. Apart from Tong Chuan, several other personal disciples had arrived, though they weren't as angry as Tong Chuan. Instead, they stood with arms crossed, watching with interest. They knew very well that the new disciple named Lin Dong wouldn't get the Pill River baptism without a challenge. Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of wind slicing through the air came from afar, and a dozen figures swept over, landing on the platform. Leading them was none other than Lin Dong and his group. As soon as Lin Dong appeared, the platform, which had been bustling with noise, fell into a quieter state. All eyes turned to him, many of them filled with curiosity and a hint of amusement. Lin Dong, upon landing, immediately sensed the strange atmosphere. but his face remained calm. He knew full well that as a new personal disciple, it was impossible to win everyone over so easily. Many of the older disciples would naturally feel resentful about him, getting the Pill River baptism on his first day. Lin Dong also knew exactly how to handle this kind of situation. What a lively bunch of youngsters. Looks like you won't be too lonely in the days to come, Little Mink said with a playful grin as he glanced around at the surrounding Wild Hall disciples. Lin Dong nodded slightly. You must be the new personal disciple who joined the Wild Hall, Lin Dong? Not long after Lin Dong's arrival, Tong Chuan couldn't contain himself any longer. He took a step forward and spoke in a deep voice. The show's about to start. Seeing Tong Chuan step forward, many of the disciples had the same thought flash through their minds. Greetings, senior brother, Lin Dong said with a faint smile, cupping his hands respectfully. Lin Dong, winning the 100 Dynasty War was indeed a contribution to the Dao Sect. However, relying on that achievement to demand special treatment might not be the wisest choice. The Pill River baptism is awarded to only one disciple per year. With your current standing, you might not be qualified for it yet. I suggest you wait 2 years to compete for the spot. It would be better for you, Tong Chuan said calmly. Is it a matter of strength or seniority? Lin Dong asked with a soft laugh. Tong Chuan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said slowly, since you're asking, I'll say both. Understood. Lin Dong nodded lightly. Then, under the watchful gazes of the many Wild Hall disciples, he stepped forward and, to everyone's surprise, cupped his hands toward Tong Chuan. Senior brother, please advise me. Both Lin Dong and Tong Chuan understood the importance of establishing one's reputation. For Lin Dong, the newcomer, now was the perfect time to make his mark.